highly doubt that the C-suites and boards hold like 30% cash of their net worth in cash and bonds, right? They would not treat their own, finances that way, but they treat the company's finances that way. And it actually would be in the best interest of shareholders, no matter your political ideology, for corporations to offset some of their losses from holding so much cash and bonds, putting a little bit into Bitcoin.
I think from the environmentalist point of view, they would probably argue, well, we are the ones on the good side, and now you're telling me this is going too far, it's partisan, it's not something that the company should be thinking about or being pushed into, but now that you're doing the same with Bitcoin, why is this any different?
We're just trying to get corporations back to neutral and back to focusing on their fiduciary duty, back to making money for their shareholders. And like you said, it's not lost on me that, of course, this is good for my bag, but
Ethan Peck is the Deputy Director of the Free Enterprise Project at the National Center for Public Policy Research,
a conservative think tank that advocates for corporate political neutrality through shareholder activism. Recently, he made waves by submitting Bitcoin shareholder proposals to giants like Microsoft and Amazon.
When I spoke to Microsoft, I submitted the proposal in June, and I spoke to them in July with their corporate treasurer. And when I spoke to a couple of the asset managers, the top shareholders of Microsoft, BlackRock, State Street, Geo Capital, a lot of times their concern was the people who own the ETFs. It's BlackRock's clients who are the ultimate shareholders. BlackRock has a responsibility to do what's in their best interest too. And so what I'm trying to tell these asset managers is, you have a duty to them. Look at how the public is reacting to this proposal. It's the most viral shareholder proposal in the history of all shareholder proposals ever submitted. Clearly there's a public interest in this.
What are your plans now for 2025, also with the institute that you're working at? Are we going to see more of these Bitcoin-inspired shareholder proposals?
Yeah, so we obviously submitted another one to Amazon after Microsoft, and I can't say which yet, but there are a couple more in the works.
Yo guys, back with another episode just around Christmas, but obviously at Less Noise More Signal we want to keep on pushing, and this time around we have Ethan Peck with us. Hey Ethan, thanks, cool to have you here.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time. As said, just right before Christmas. How are things on your side?
Good. It's cold here. In Celsius, I guess it would be like -10 or something. So we're located in Europe.
Yeah, I'm in Switzerland. Currently also quite cold. It's been snowing for the last like 1 day or 2 days. Yeah, so that's kind of cold. We got maybe a white Christmas, but what about you?
Yeah. A little snow. I mean, I'm in New York, so there's some snow.
Okay, nice. Cool. Yeah, and you were recommended to me by some person I already had on the show, Andrew Hones, and when we were talking about the structured Bitcoin finance, and at the end of this discussion, we also got into the whole shareholder activism thing, and how it's been pushed on the Bitcoin front. And then he told me, yeah, I really have to talk to you. So maybe if you could quickly introduce yourself and then also make the connection to the topic we want to talk about today.
Yeah. So yeah, I spoke to Andrew Hones one time, and we can get into that a little bit later. He was an enormous help, basically, when we were trying to convince asset managers to vote for the Microsoft shareholder proposal that we submitted. I brought Andrew into the call. So yeah, my name is Ethan Peck. I work at the National Center for Public Policy Research. And what we do is we essentially submit shareholder proposals to companies trying to bring corporations back to neutral. So a lot of our focus is on insofar as ESG, insofar as we believe that ESG is partisan, extreme in many ways sometimes, and pushes companies to adopt positions that are not purely beneficial to shareholders and sort of outside of their normal fiduciary duties, and actually risking shareholder value in order to pursue a partisan agenda in a number of areas, whether it's environmental activism or sort of diversity, equity, and inclusion, or a number of other things. We try to get corporations out of that and back to neutral, because shareholders are divided about these sorts of things. They're very divisive things, and we believe that this is for the halls of Congress. That's where these things should be debated, not in the boardroom. The board's job is only to pursue the interests of all shareholders and stay out of divisive partisan things, and get back to making money for shareholders. And then out of that, sort of grew my idea to submit a shareholder proposal asking corporations to buy some Bitcoin.
Interesting. Well, I mean, I have one follow-up question for sure to kind of play devil's advocate here, like, why is it different with Bitcoin then? Because like, I think from the environmentalist point of view, they would probably argue, well, we are the ones on the good side. And now you're telling me this is going too far. It's partisan, it's not something that the company should be thinking about or being pushed into. But now that you're doing the same with Bitcoin, why is this any different? So what is your argument against
Yeah,
that?
that's an excellent question. So actually, I had this idea. Personally, I'm a Bitcoiner, and at work, I submit, I've 50 shareholder proposals a year, all of them asking corporations to stop doing something, never asking corporations to do something. It's always like, stop your DEI, stop your radical net zero policy that will damage your company. Stop. It's always defensive. It was never on the offensive. And so even though personally as a Bitcoiner, in 2022, I had an idea. When I submit a Bitcoin proposal, I stopped myself because I didn't want to put my own values onto a corporation. I didn't want to project my own interests onto a corporation. There's always, get political things out of it. And it wasn't until 2024 that I realized, wait a minute, corporations are holding a lot of cash and they're buying a lot of bonds. And the cash and bonds are just sitting there on the balance sheet, losing value, and they're not doing anything to address it. They're not adequately addressing it all. And the best solution to that is Bitcoin. So I was actually like reverse engineered. It wasn't like I want to do a Bitcoin proposal. Let me see how I'm going to do it. It was more along the lines of where are the blind spots of these corporations because of their sort of ideological hegemony and very tilted towards the left. One of them is inflation. They don't view it the way, of course, Bitcoin is also, Bitcoin's also an apolitical sort of thing. It's bipartisan. You have Bitcoiners on the left and the right and the center and anarchists and even socialists, even though they're more rare, but they exist. And so Bitcoiner sort of breaks those boundaries. And so I got to a place where I was comfortable saying, okay, it's not really pushing a right-wing agenda in any sort of way, even though our think tank that I work for is a conservative think tank. We don't push right-wing things onto corporations. We try to get left-wing things out. Because Bitcoin is like that, it sort of transcends the normal political spectrum, and it actually would be in the best interest of shareholders, no matter your political ideology, for corporations to offset some of their losses from holding so much cash and bonds, just putting a little bit of Bitcoin, by putting a little bit into Bitcoin. I said, okay, this proposal makes sense from an objective perspective. And if you don't think so, then do an assessment. That's why, the proposal doesn't just ask them to outright buy Bitcoin. It says, how about you do an assessment to see if this is in the best interest of shareholders to buy Bitcoin? I turn it back at them and say, you do the assessment.
Yeah, I see. Interesting. Okay. Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's obviously always, it boils down to what sort of, basic or just like fundamental understanding you have of the world. But it's just interesting that you're telling me now, that you were coming from traditionally coming from this more conservative sort of defensive way, where you were kind of trying to stop companies from doing something. And obviously now with Bitcoin, it's maybe the first time the other way around. But still, I mean, because when I first heard of that strategy, using shareholder activism, obviously for the good of Bitcoin, and then also, as you just argued, maybe for the good of the companies as well, this really struck me, because obviously I always had shareholder activism. For me, was always really left-wing influenced. Exactly. Yeah. It was always like, they are trying to push something on companies. And now, because it's maybe I'm a Bitcoiner myself, then you find yourself rooting for something like this as well. And then obviously you kind of want to also question your own assumptions. Are you just now rooting for something like this because it's good for your own bags, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, it was just interesting because I also thought like in the past we probably saw some left groups or environmentalists and green people, you know, who actually were quite successful in steering companies in sort of these directions. I don't know if you have any sort of examples from this, you know, from the past, and because then Bitcoin can actually learn from them and put their proposal probably into practice as well.
Yeah, so there definitely are shareholder. There are success stories of shareholder activism. Most of them coming from the left. And there are also some there are some groups on the right that we distance ourselves from because they also, you know, try to do what the left is doing and maybe trying to push corporations to adopt a certain sort of partisan agenda. And we don't do that. We draw a line. You know, we're just trying to get corporations back to neutral and back to focusing on their fiduciary duty, back to making money for their shareholders. And like you said, of course, it's not lost on me that, of course, this is good for my bag. But if corporations were to adopt Bitcoin, but genuinely, it's coming from a place of what's in the best interest of shareholders. That's what I do every day. I wake up and I try to defend shareholder interests. 90% of the time, it's because corporations are doing woke things that risk shareholder interests, and they're not focusing on, you know, basic things like hiring the best person for the job, not demonizing energy that their company runs on, things like that. You know, when Exxon goes and demonizes fossil fuels and their job is to sell gasoline, it's sort of, it's bewildering. And so we do things like that. It's not because we don't care about the environment. It's because we're just out there looking for shareholder interests. And it just occurred to me that Bitcoin, adopting at least some Bitcoin, is in the best interest of shareholders.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I want to talk about this, you know, about how you go about like putting these proposals in front of these companies. But maybe just one last point that came to mind, you know, because like, as you said, it's always, is it good for my own bags? Yeah, obviously it is, you know, but then because I'm hearing this question or this almost like, sort of people try to challenge me on this. You know, when I work at a bank as well, you know, obviously nowadays I'm sort of responsible for digital assets. And then I sometimes hear people asking me, well, aren't you just rooting for Bitcoin? You know, isn't that sort of like a conflict of interest, you know? But in the end, yeah, obviously I'm rooting for Bitcoin. I work in Bitcoin because I believe in it, you know, and then that's how just the world, just how it works in the world, you know. It's always hard. If you believe in something, you want to go there, you want to push for it, and then it's always the same with every topic, so to say, you know. And that's why we could always carve out some sort of I would say conflict of interest, you know.
Well, on that point, I think this is why I didn't ask Microsoft to, you know, become MicroStrategy. When I spoke to them, I said, how about you look into buying a few percent, you know, putting a few percent of your assets in Bitcoin. MicroStrategy, because they said they had issues with volatility. When I spoke to Microsoft, I submitted the proposal in June, and I spoke to them in July with their corporate treasurer. And when I spoke to a couple of the asset managers, the top shareholders of Microsoft, BlackRock, State Street, Geo Capital, a lot of times their concern was volatility. You know, people aren't buying Microsoft with the same risk profile as when people who buy Bitcoin. We're in Bitcoin, we're used to seeing Bitcoin drop 10% and just who cares? You know, we know it's going to come back up. But for somebody that's 55, 60 years old, you know, buying Microsoft stock, they're not buying it with the same. By the way, and stocks can be volatile like Bitcoin too, but they're not buying it with the same sort of risk profile. And so that's a genuine question. That's why I said to them, listen, MicroStrategy, I think it's a great strategy. I think it's cool. And, you know, I own MicroStrategy, full disclosure, but they own, I think 98% of their balance sheet is Bitcoin. And I would never say to Microsoft, hey, even though personally I would like that, you know, I think that that's good for the company, I would never say to them, hey, you know, use the same approach that become a Bitcoin treasury company. I just said to them, there's many ways that you can use Bitcoin. How about, I think it's stupid to hold a lot of, 75 billion in cash, but just put 3-4% in Bitcoin. At least you'll offset in the long term. You'll offset, the amount that the cash is being debased, and the percentages that the bond yields are not catching up to inflation. That's it. That's a request that's very it's a safe conservative request that I believe is much easier to get to a place where you see, okay, that's objectively in the best interest of shareholders. And I'm actually curbing my own personal, because if I were just personally requesting to them, I would say, buy a lot more Bitcoin, put 30, 40, 50%. But I tried to put myself aside and say, okay, what is safely within, their fiduciary duties. And that's why I put that low percentage in the proposal, because I think it's safe to say that in the long term, look at Tesla. They have like $900 billion worth of Bitcoin. Tesla stock does not move with Bitcoin the way MicroStrategy stock moves with Bitcoin. And so anyone saying to me, like, Microsoft buying some Bitcoin, that will cause the stock to be volatile. Tesla stock is volatile too, but not because it has some Bitcoin. It's not at all tied to the price of Bitcoin insofar as the way MicroStrategy or Marathon or Riot is. And so I think that's just, a way that I think that I genuinely wasn't trying to just push my own interests on the company. It just happened to, some overlap a little bit.
Yeah, sure. No, and I think it also kind of perfectly mimics, a Bitcoiner's personal story, because if I can remember my story, when I learned about Bitcoin, I didn't just automatically put in 80% of my wealth into Bitcoin, it wasn't like that.
Yeah.
You approach it quite conservatively, and you do your due diligence, at least I know a lot of Bitcoiners who did it in the beginning, because they remain skeptical, and some of the most clever Bitcoin or the cleverest Bitcoin I still know today, they're still sort of skeptical in some sort of way, but and that's why you grow more conviction, and obviously, then because it mimics that your personal Bitcoiner story or Bitcoin story, I would argue this also makes sense then to not kind of just have companies go about it in a whole different way. So that's certainly something to point out as well. I mean, one question that I would have, in terms of when you present the case and around Bitcoin, is it mostly the Treasury case that you're alluding to, or also that there's like other use cases that a company like Microsoft and shareholders could be profiting off of,
Yeah, well, I think down the road, definitely, like, there are many ways that companies can use Bitcoin if they want to take some of their excess, energy usage and mine Bitcoin, or they want to use Bitcoin mining to heat their warehouses, or they want to develop software for Bitcoin wallets, or they want to, but this proposal was just, again, I came out of a problem that I saw, and Bitcoin was the solution. It wasn't that I was thinking from a Bitcoin first perspective. Companies were holding too much cash, too much bonds. What's the solution for that? No one's addressing it. Bitcoin is a good solution for that. How about we start addressing at least a little bit? That's where and I felt like that, very conservative minor request was squarely within fiduciary duty of the company, and that's why I asked them to do it. That's purely where it came from. So right now, it's just a Treasury question. Maybe down the line, I'll put some sort of other request, but I'll only do it if I believe it's in the best interest of all shareholders, because that's, the oath that I took during the shot.
Yeah, I see. And why would you say is it so important to kind of orange pill these companies? Like maybe also from a societal point of view, because you just argued for the point of view of the company itself. So it's important that they kind of have this cash which is melting away, that they can kind of store it in a better sort of value. But then also maybe from a societal point of view, why is it so important that we get companies to buy into Bitcoin in the end?
Uh, I mean, I have some answers that I think Bitcoin will fix a lot of things, because when you have sort of fiat money, uh, you get a fiat standard of everything. And so I have personal beliefs around when companies start to adopt a harder asset and they change their time preference, it'll affect a lot of things for the better. But that's not why I submitted this proposal. I wish I can give you sort of a longer answer, but uh, it it's such a simple request. And I'll say it a million times, but this request is just companies have too much cash, it's melting away, it's losing value. They're buying bonds. The bond yields are not outpacing inflation. There's billions of dollars of shareholder value just diminishing, just sitting on the balance sheet. No company's addressing it. It's a massive problem. Bitcoin's a good solution. That's it. It's such a simple request.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see your point. I mean, in the end, probably what I was alluding to was more like companies. Obviously they make up a big part of society as well, because they sometimes, even especially the big companies, they employ a lot of people, and in that way they also sort of influence people, and they influence society at large, like companies shape public opinion in some sort of way, and that's why I think if you get companies to kind of adopt also Bitcoin, that sends another signal. It's the same with the SBR discussion that we're having right now, the strategic Bitcoin reserve in the US. If the US were to adopt something like this would send such a strong signal. And I think it would be the same with companies. And then like funding lobbying efforts, is probably going to get easier. And overall adoption would probably be easier if we have like some of the big companies on our side. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on these points.
I do have thoughts, and I think that all of those things are true. But I swear that's not why I submitted the proposal. Like I didn't submit the proposal for Bitcoin. I used Bitcoin for Shareholder.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, but then maybe we can switch over to how do you actually propose something like this? Because that's probably something I would be curious, and a lot of people as well. Because I'm a layman in these type of things, and obviously, how do you get to talk in front of Microsoft in the end? I mean, that sounds kind of crazy, And so maybe you can walk us through the process of how that actually works.
Sure. So basically, if you own $2,000 worth of stock in a company for at least 3 years, or $15,000 worth continuously for 2 years, or $25,000 worth for 1 year, and it has to be continuous. Like if it drops below that level for a second, the clock resets. Then you're eligible to submit a proposal. And then you have to submit a proposal by a certain day. Like there's a deadline. So for Microsoft, it was June, and for the meeting in December. And you have to, there's a lot of like wording requirements. You can't ask certain things that infringe upon their ordinary business. So that's another reason why the proposal, if you saw, was a request to assess if it's in the best interest of shareholders to buy Bitcoin. It wasn't just like buy Bitcoin. Another reason for that was because if I did that, if it just said, shareholders request that the board allocate 5% of the company's treasury to Bitcoin, that might be shot down by the SEC, because then the company could go to the SEC and say, this shareholder is asking something unreasonable because they're infringing upon our ordinary business. We want to omit this shareholder proposal from the ballot so that no one can even vote on it. And then the SEC, biased as they are, usually rules in favor of the company. So we have to be very, very careful. So there's, wording requirements. Also, you have to keep it below 500 words. And there's lots of like little red tape that you can't go past. So like if you a word with an apostrophe S at the end will count as 2 words, or a hyphenated word will count as 2 words, or the percentage sign counts as a word because it's like percent. There's all kinds of little things like that. If I've gone over like the word limit and been tossed out from things like that. So there's a bunch of little tiny things that you have to just abide by SEC regulations. Once you do that, there's a sort of negotiation process. So like I said, I spoke to Microsoft in July, about a month after I submitted the proposal to them. There was a meeting with their counsel and with their corporate treasurer. The corporate treasurer was only included on this call because of the nature of the proposal. Usually it's someone from like their ESG team or something like that. And, I made the case to him. He seemed somewhat convinced, actually, but sort of timid because no one wants to rock the boat. So we run into that problem a lot. Like, what are other companies doing? Is any other companies doing this? Why should we do this sort of thing if most other companies are not? They're all scared. And so then that happened. Then it was clear that they weren't going to support the proposal even after that conversation. So I when it went public in October, when the SEC published the proxy ballot, it sort of went viral. I did not expect that at all. And then when Saylor tweeted it out to Satya Nadella, I reached out to Saylor. I reached out to someone who reached out to someone who contacted Saylor, and I offered him to speak in my place at the meeting because as part of the shareholder proposal process, you get 3 minutes to speak at the meeting.
And you can invite anyone to that. That will.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've done it before. Yeah. So I've had other people speak in my place before on different issues.
I was wondering how Saylor actually ended up speaking in front of Microsoft. So so you were inviting him.
Yeah. So I got in a Zoom with Saylor. It was pretty cool. He's exactly the same person in a private Zoom as he is, publicly. And he was, we basically came to an agreement, okay, let's offer Microsoft, because I said to him, let's try to settle. And he was like, yeah, that was exactly where my head was at. Let's offer Microsoft to withdraw the proposal, take it off the ballot, if Saylor can get a one-on-one in-person meeting with Satya Nadella. And so I offered that to Microsoft. I said to them, we'll withdraw the proposal. We won't submit a proposal in 2025 either. If you just agree to a 1-hour in-person meeting, off books, Saylor will sign an NDA. He'll fly anywhere in the world to meet Nadella. And they said no. So our backup plan was, okay, Michael, do you want to give if they say no, do you want to, give the proposal a statement on my behalf? And he said yes. And then he followed through with it, made that presentation. And I also sent that around to a bunch of companies. I sent that to Amazon too. I sent it to, I won't say yet which, but there are a couple other companies where we submitted the proposal, and I sent it to them also.
Interesting. Yeah, no, because in a recent podcast where I was listening to Saylor, he was actually saying that he's going to have to go again, and maybe this time he's going to get 30 minutes. And I was just wondering, is he kind of speculating, or is that something which is going to happen, because I don't know if you have any insights there. Maybe he's pursuing this now on his own as well, just because he thought maybe there's something to get here or to get.
Yeah, well, I only spoke to Michael one time. I don't want to speak on his behalf. I don't know what he's up to, but I know that he's definitely open always to speaking to whoever about Bitcoin adoption. So
yeah. And the proposal itself, because that's something I was wondering as well. Is this going to get, or was this getting in front of the actual CEO that you mentioned? I like the C level itself. Have they been made aware of this?
Of course.
Well, sure.
They attend the meeting. So
exactly.
Yeah,
they do, right?
And they advised shareholders to vote against the proposal. So they look at every proposal. That's part of what the reason for submitting shareholder proposal is in general. Most of them lose. 99% of all shareholder proposals on any topic don't pass, but you get to knock on the door and present something to the C-suites and raise the topic that you wouldn't otherwise get to raise. And sort of Bitcoiners now made this a national conversation. It wasn't. I submitted the proposal, but I honestly think that I didn't do most of the work. I think the Cyber Hornets did the work. They're the ones that made this viral. They're the ones that made this a national conversation. Like, hey, companies should be holding some Bitcoin.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's also the point, because as far as I was informed, they turned it down with like 0.55 of the votes that were actually in favor of it, right? So it was just a tiny fraction of people voting yes on that proposal, right?
Well, it's not exactly like that. So, okay, a lot of people see that and they go, okay, 0.55%. But if you were to go down the street and you were to pull 200 random people, what are the odds on any question? What are the odds you get a result of 199 to 1? Not very high.
Yeah.
So it's not actually like, that's not how the voting works. I wish I could say like 99.5% of shareholders. It's not, that's not the way it is. The way it really is the top asset managers and proxy advisory services control over 90% of the vote. So almost all shareholder proposals are like this. Like if BlackRock just changed their vote, that's 12% right there. Okay. If State Street changed their vote, that's another like 7% right there. So when you get 0.55%, what that means is like the top 12 people, you just went like over 12. That's what it actually means. Because it's like the top 10 shareholders and the 2 proxy advisory services, which are ISS and Glass Lewis, they basically recommend to the pension funds how to vote. That's 99. That's the vote right there. So it's like, you flip a couple of them, right? You flip BlackRock, State Street, and Geode, and you're already at 40%, maybe, close to it. And one proxy advisor, you're already at like 30-40%. So, that when I've attended well over 100 meetings, maybe 200 plus meetings in my life, I don't know, I lost count. At each one of these meetings, you got like 7 to 15 board members up for election. At like the Microsoft meeting, I think there was 12. So you're talking about, I've seen well over 1,000 board members up for election. I have never seen a board member get below 90%. So you're talking about like 1,200 out of 1,200 board members receiving 94% of the vote plus. That's not a real election. So it's like, so then people ask, so what's the point of even submitting shareholder proposal if it's not a real election? Some pass sometimes. It happens. And when they pass is when the asset managers and the proxy advisory services decide well beforehand that it's going to pass. And so that's why I set up these meetings with BlackRock, with Geode Capital, with State Street to try to convince them to vote for the proposal a month before the meeting. So that's when I spoke with Andrew Hones. When I spoke to Geode Capital, Jesse Kobernick, who's a corporate lawyer and a Bitcoiner, I got connected to him, and he invited Andrew Hones, and Jesse and Andrew and myself spoke to Geode, and we tried to convince them to vote for the proposal and make the case for Bitcoin. Ultimately, they opposed it, but a lot of these asset managers, they oppose almost every proposal. It's very, very, very rare for them to support any proposal, and even rarer to support a first-time proposal. But that doesn't mean that the next time around and the next time so like with Amazon, it's the same people voting. And then with the next couple of companies, the same people voting. So we get more and more and more and more, times.
It's like incremental steps. Yeah, it's incremental steps that you take, and that's what I was going to ask. Is that like the strategy going forward, to kind of bring all these shareholders and stakeholders, which are of importance, to one table in the end, at the BlackRocks and like the proxy advisors that you mentioned, and given you can at some point, persuade them, that obviously ups your chances like significantly. And is that sort of the strategy that you're pursuing? And obviously, if it's just a higher price will help. Like a lot of people, as you said, the Cyber Hornets also pushing for it on social media, kind of also, sort of gaslighting the companies at some point, because like you can, but like once Bitcoin price is really high, and then like you're resubmitting the proposal, and then it's like, okay, guys, Bitcoin is now at 200K, and you fumbled the bag, and what's happening here? Then next time it makes it a lot easier maybe, and that's where all the plebs from the social square, so to say, can help you, right?
Exactly. So it's like the next time I go to, if the Microsoft proposal passed 5%, you're allowed to resubmit. So once any proposal passes 5%, you could submit it again. So the goal was that 5%, so that you can resubmit next year, so that you can come back to the company and say, I submitted this in June when it was 60,000. We spoke when it was like 68,000. We spoke again when it was like 70,000. When the meeting happened, I think it was like, in the 80s or 90s. Probably next year it'll be a lot higher. You obviously fumbled. So that's definitely part of it. And going to these proxy advisories like ISS and Glass Lewis, into the asset managers like BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street, they're not the ultimate shareholders. Like BlackRock is not the ultimate shareholders. The people who own the ETFs, it's BlackRock's clients who are the ultimate shareholders. BlackRock has a responsibility to do what's in their best interest too. And so what I'm trying to tell these asset managers is, you have a duty to them. Look at how the public is reacting to this proposal. It's the most viral shareholder proposal in the history of all shareholder proposals ever submitted. Clearly, there's a public interest in this. BlackRock, by the way, they're buying up a lot of Bitcoin themselves. Their best-selling product right now is their Bitcoin ETF. It's their fastest-growing ETF in history. They're the holders of 500,000 plus Bitcoin. They're the second biggest holder behind Satoshi, I think. Satoshi owns it outright, but they have, and they voted against the proposal. So that's, it's fascinating to think that BlackRock voted against this proposal. I think that, and so what I'm trying to tell them is, you have a duty to your clients, you have a duty to the public, you have a duty to the shareholders of Microsoft to do what's in their best interest. You can't just, and this is my argument to them for years, which is, you can't just, pursue ESG because you believe in ESG. You have to do what's in shareholder interest, and this is clearly in the best interest of shareholders. At least try to look at it from an objective, do an objective assessment. Because when I spoke to some proxy advisory services, I think it was, I can't say who, but one of them said to me, the rationale for voting the proposal was Microsoft already considered it. And it's like, well, that's what Microsoft said, but they didn't show any proof. You can't just say, I'm taking the board's word for it. Where's your own third-party assessment if this is in the best interest of shareholders? They didn't do that. And so that right there is proof to me that the asset managers and the proxy advisory services, the way they're addressing this, they're not doing their own due diligence to do what's in the best interest of shareholders. They're just sort of taking the board's word for it. And they can't be doing that. That's not their duty.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, in the end, that's what makes me so bullish, because Bitcoin it really is this grassroots movement, and obviously, it's one Bitcoiner at a time, or one block after another, where one Bitcoiner is born, and obviously, at some point, these asset managers, managing money on behalf of all these clients, they will be sort of holding Bitcoin privately, and at some point they will kind of say, okay, we also want you guys now to vote in our interest, and I think this just shows me we're still way too early, and it also kind of logically it makes sense for me that something like this was probably put down in 2024, because it's just we're way too early, and now it is on the public agenda, sort of, and with Bitcoin, stuff happens fast, because as you said, all the cyber hornets are going to make it into a really big topic. But then if we zoom out and project this out into maybe 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years, I mean, this is going to be a lot more of a topic that is going to move the needle. And that's why I also wanted to bring you on, because I think we're so early, but now already thinking about these type of things gets you this perspective of what's could and probably will be happening in the future.
Yeah, I think we're early in terms of total public sentiment and in terms of just the percentage of institutional adoption. But I don't think we're too early for corporations to do a fair assessment to see if they should adopt this, because I think that right now it makes sense for corporations to at least buy some Bitcoin. Even BlackRock itself went out and recommended a 2% allocation, but then they voted against the proposal for a couple percent allocation. And so they, it's like they're speaking out of both sides of their mouth, because it's the way shareholder relations work is very corrupt right now. So the people who decide at these meetings how every item is voted are the investment stewardship departments of the asset managers. So it's like there's literally a department at all these asset managers that their job is just to vote proposals and vote for directors. Because if you think about it, BlackRock owns thousands of companies. At each company, you have 10 directors up for election, 5 shareholder proposals, maybe a management proposal about an auditor, I'm sorry, an accounting firm, and so you're talking about like 10 to 25 items up for each company. They own thousands and thousands of companies. You're talking about hundreds of thousands of items that they have to vote every year. So they have an entire department whose job is to do nothing but vote.
Just vote, yeah.
Right. So like, to get them to care about this one proposal,
they don't even have time. So it's the resources.
The people, exactly. The people that were put into, because they have those people that vote have so much sway over the sort of policy positions of the company. The people that were put into those positions were very like pro ESG sort of mentality, and those people tend to not be Bitcoiners. If you see what I'm getting at, they tend to be sort of like left-leaning, side with the regime sort of types. Okay, even though there are also Bitcoiner again across the spectrum, support across the spectrum. Sure. The kinds of people that were put into the investment stewardship departments to push ESG onto companies are less likely to be Bitcoiners. Let's put it that way. And so convincing them they're the ones that vote is a tall order. And there's a disconnect between the investment stewardship department and the people at BlackRock, say, that buy Bitcoin and sell a Bitcoin ETF product to their clients. I just know, I don't want to speak too much about this because I don't want to, someone told me this in confidence. But I know someone at not BlackRock, but a different massive asset manager that has a lot of Bitcoin and sells a Bitcoin ETF. I know someone that works in their digital assets department and told me that their entire, digital assets department was pulling for the Microsoft proposal to pass. They were very interested in it. Fidelity, a lot of people at Fidelity were interested in it. But when I told them, let's set up a meeting with the investment stewardship department, they were told to back off and not get involved in office politics and let the investment stewardship department do what they do. And so there's a disconnect there. The investment stewardship department wouldn't take a meeting with me at this asset manager. They told me to take a hike, and they ultimately opposed the proposal. And so that's part of the larger problem of, you have asset managers now, they're not doing what's in the best interest of shareholders. There's a system in place to politicize corporations and to push corporations in a certain direction, and to penetrate that system, and not even penetrate, just to get them to realize, look at what you're doing. Every corporation in America is holding a huge amount of cash and bonds. It's just losing shareholder value. You have every pension fund is invested in all these ETFs and all these companies who are all holding tons of cash and buying tons of bonds, just sitting there, losing value.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yep. Yeah, but the point that you're making here, I mean, I can also speak from my personal experience, maybe working within the financial sector as well, and having worked as a financial journalist and talking to people within the sector, it's the same thing with the fiat system. Like, just exclude Bitcoin for a moment, but then obviously I was always studying the monetary system, the fiat system, and then I came to a conclusion that this is somehow rotten at its core, and a lot of things are not going well. And then when I ask these questions and I talk to like C-level guys in banks and all over the financial system, most of the people, like, personally, were telling me, look, this is all screwed, and we should be steering or like, yeah, steering the wheel around, because it's just going down the drain. But then, like, because they were in a sort of institutional setup, they couldn't just move, and they had to kind of, even though personally they were against this, they had to uh, vote, or just like behave in a different way, and I think that's why it's going to take a lot longer. Obviously, if we like keep on pounding the drum about it, at some point these things are going to trickle down, and then one by one these like sort of institutionalized walls will fall down. But that's just how things happen, and that's why it's going a lot slower than we usually think. But just one thing, maybe as a word of encouragement for everyone, we just don't want to stop ever, because then probably we're not moving forward, or yeah, it's going to come to a standstill. And as long as we're moving, I think, yeah, things in the background are moving, and we'll have some sort of success at some point, I guess.
Yeah, I think exactly. I think that that's true too. I think that there's lots of people that personally buy Bitcoin, or not even just Bitcoin. They won't. I highly doubt that the C-suites and boards hold like 30% cash of their net worth in cash and bonds, right? They would not treat their own, finances that way, but they treat the company's finances that way. And I think that speaks to a sort of, they really don't care about shareholders. That's been my experience for years dealing with them now. So that's the bigger problem that I was getting at. But yes, I think you're also right that there's a lot of people that personally buy Bitcoin, get it. But like Tim Cook said that he's interested in Bitcoin, but he would never buy it for Apple, right? So there are other CEOs the same. So I think that, and CFOs probably as well. And that again, that's been my experience in dealing with a lot of these people, that they get it personally, but they can't come around to seeing. It's not even that they can't come around to seeing; they don't want to rock the boat. They got a cushiony job. You're the CFO of a Mag 7 company. Why would you're keeping your job by having the worst possible strategy for the company, and you're still keeping, which is holding 75 billion in cash and bonds, and you're doing a terrible job, and you're still keeping your job because you know that your job is to play it safe, buy the bonds, do not rock the boat. And so they're all being told that this is the way you keep your job. And so that's why they don't rock the boat. So I definitely agree with that. And I think that will slowly change. But I also see, from my experience dealing with this, that there also is a subset of people that vote on these proposals that are decidedly anti-Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, then let's just hope like Bitcoin becomes ever more socially acceptable, and sort of, because it's more and more entrenched in the financial system. And at some point, as you said, like most of these C-level type of guys, exactly, they don't hold cash. They hold it in something which is not dilutive as much, probably shares and another type of like better sort of values. But then maybe once Bitcoin is socially acceptable also in these type of circles, and I think we're really on the verge of this happening, then we might be seeing stuff like this becoming more normal, and actually being passed by corporate management and stuff. So, and in shareholders in the end. That's interesting. Maybe one last question, just out of curiosity. What are your plans now for 2025? Also with the institute that you're working at, we going to see more of these Bitcoin-inspired shareholder proposals? And can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. So we obviously submitted another one to Amazon after Microsoft. And I can't say which yet, but there are a couple more in the works. Not many, because we have we only have the bandwidth to submit like 50 proposals a year. And there's a lot of other issues that we address, but there's a couple more.
And do you see other institutes or like sort of like maybe also other groups, interest groups, like following your example? Have like other groups been reaching out to you and sort of like want to get some sort of script, that they can follow, or anything on that front that is going on as well?
Yeah. So I spoke to a couple people, and there's a bunch of people interested in this now because they were like, wait, we can do this? And I was like, yeah, you can do this. You can. And so I advised a couple of people on how to, do it, and I hope that they pursue it. Again, we shouldn't be the only ones submitting this. It is my hope that it becomes more of a grassroots movement, and that you have many different proponents submitting this kind of proposal or something similar. Because when you have more than one proponent submitting the same thing, it sends a signal to these companies that it's not just one, pro-Bitcoin institution submitting this proposal. It's a widespread thing. And B, because there's a heavy bias against my organization, National Center. We've been fighting ESG for a long time. And as you can imagine, a lot of these corporations and asset managers are very pro-ESG. And so we've been a thorn in their side for years. And they hate us, to put it mildly. So there's even motivation for them to oppose this proposal just to stick it to us. And so that's another reason why I also wanted to submit this proposal, because it's so obviously in the best interest of shareholders for companies to just even look into buying just a few percent Bitcoin, that it just shows like the bias. And their closed-mindedness, and it puts on display how much they don't care about shareholder interests. And so that was another, because ultimately my goal is to get corporations back to focusing on their fiduciary duty. And that's what we do here at National Center. And so I hope that more proponents submit this proposal. And if anybody has any questions about how to submit something like this, what the process is like, how do you do it in a way it doesn't get excluded by the SEC? Because again, if you ask for something too risky, not only will it get excluded by the SEC, that'll also set a precedent for other people to not be able to submit that proposal. So if somebody's out there listening, they want to submit a proposal, let's say you submit something like asking a company to adopt MicroStrategy's strategy, Bitcoin Treasury strategy, and then the SEC thinks it's too radical and rejects it, then you can't submit that kind of proposal for like another 5 years. And it's because it sets a precedent for not being. So you want to be careful into what you ask. So if anybody listening out there owns shares in a company, wants to submit a proposal, I would love for you to do it. Feel free to reach out to me. My email is epeck@nationalcenter.org, and I'll help you through it. And I hope that more people do this.
Great, Ethan. Yeah, that's for sure. Anybody that's interested should be reaching out to you. That's also how I got a hold of you. Just email you guys, and then people will hear back. That's great. Well, I mean, thanks a lot for everything, for all the insights. Just one last question that we ask to every guest on the show. Any person that comes to mind, which is also sort of high signal that we should be talking to on the podcast?
I would speak to Tim Kotzman and Jesse Kobernick. They interviewed me about this as well. And Tim has been reporting on Bitcoin treasuries. He has I think his podcast is called Bitcoin Treasuries. So he's really like on the ground. He broke the news about the Amazon proposal, and he's always talking about MicroStrategy. So I think that he's a good person to talk to on this topic.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Ethan. So Merry Christmas. Have a great one. And
thank you.
Maybe one day we'll see each other.
Yeah, for you as well. Thanks a lot.
Bye, Ethan.
Nice.